Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to those present in the Chamber and those listening online to this morning's business of the Lincolnshire County Council's Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee. My name is Ian Carrington, Councillor Ian Carrington. I am the chairman of this committee. Councillor Martin Griggs, vice chairman, will be in attendance very shortly, and we will be joined by a number of other members of the council and senior officers of the council as we go forward. A few housekeeping notes. The audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and all your comments will remain accessible online along with that recording. In terms of health and safety, we don't have a fire drill planned for this morning, so in the event of the fire alarm sounding, please leave the chamber, exit the building through reception, which is at the opposite end of the room from me, and assemble in the front car park to await further instructions. Mobiles, laptops, iPads, and any other devices, please make sure they are now on silent, and the hearing loop is now activated if anybody needs it. I'm not seeing anybody expressing a need in the chamber, but if you do, please see one of our officers. Requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chairman when he arrives and me until he does. Please indicate early when you wish to speak, and we'll now move on to the formal agenda. So, item 1 on that agenda, apologies for absence and replacement members. Andrew Warnes.
Good morning, Chairman. We've got apologies from Councillor Hilton Spratt, who's been replaced today by Councillor Paul Skinner. We have no further apologies. I've just been informed that the Vice Chairman is about 5 minutes away, so he'll be here momentarily.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to item 2, declaration of members' interest. This is an opportunity for members to declare any pecuniary or other interests. Do any members wish to declare? I am seeing none, but if any interest does become evident to you as we move through our business this morning, do just make that clear to me. So we move to item 3 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of November 2024. These have been circulated to everyone in advance, so I'm not going to go through them page by page. The item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record, and you will find them on pages 5 to 16 of the agenda pack. So, does anybody, first thing to ask, anybody have any comments or corrections? I am seeing none. In that case, may I have a proposer, please, that they are a true and accurate record? Councillor Linda Wootton, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Taylor. We'll now vote. All in favour, please show. Thank you very much. Any abstentions? 2 abstentions. Any against? None against. That is carried. That is carried. Thank you very much. We now move to Chairman's announcements and announcements from Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. For myself, I would make the usual point that, as always, we have a busy agenda ahead of us today, which includes the consideration of 2 pre-decision reports. So I would like to begin by asking those presenting reports to take these as read by members and just summarise the key points and the type of input expected by the committee. Introductions of reports will be capped at 5 minutes to ensure that we have sufficient time to consider and debate. The only other point that I would like to make from the chair just concerns wearing the environment side of our business. We were the first committee in this council to debate the impacts of Storm Storm Babette, immediately after it happened, followed, of course, by Storm Hank. And as your chairman, I have been honoured to be a +1 on the inquiry group chaired by Councillor Tom Ashton under the auspices of the Flood and Water Management Committee. I just wanted to report back that the inquiry is moving to its very, very final stages. I've been honoured to play a part in actually drafting the recommendations of that report, which will, I believe, be published in about 2 weeks' time. And it's really timely, isn't it? Because we have just had another flooding event where over 100 premises have very sadly been flooded out, and more than 30 of those have actually suffered in Babette and Henk. And I hope that the recommendations which will come out of the storm impact inquiry, if heeded, will really help that situation. The climate is changing. There is a change pattern to the weather events. Let's remember, it wasn't even a named storm that caused the problems that arose on the 9th of January. So it is really important we get this right, and there will be recommendations there across a broad range of matters. So I would refer everybody on this committee to have a look at that report when it comes out. Right, we move on to Executive Councillor announcements, and I believe we have Councillor Colin Davey online. We do. Colin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And I'm not going to reiterate what you've just said about the events at the beginning of January in relation to flooding. I gave a very extensive report to the Flood and Drainage Committee just recently. But you're absolutely right that these are ever recurring events now in Lincolnshire, and quite clearly we do need to consider how water is making an impact on our residents and our businesses' lives, and also sometimes the lack of water for our food sector. So that report, as you rightly say, the scrutiny report will come out shortly, and I'm sure we'll have a debate across council about it. I'll move on now to some further thoughts. I know that members of the committee, like me, are driven to achieve better lives for our residents and our people, to protect and celebrate what is wonderful about our county, to support businesses to thrive and to challenge what we need to change. Over the coming weeks, we'll be hosting a series of events that will help us to continue to achieve that ambition. I know how important forums, events and conferences are for businesses. Just 2 weeks ago, we held an agriculture and horticultural forum based on water, bringing landowners together with key players, including the Environment Agency, Anglian Water and the internal drainage boards, to create positive changes for the county. The feedback from that event has been excellent from all those who attended. Looking forward, we will continue to bring together other networks, including on the 11th of February, we have our inaugural Connect and Network event at the Drill in Lincoln. It is a new forum designed to help businesses in Greater Lincolnshire network, grow, enter new markets, and tackle challenges through tailored support. The Connect and Network Business Support Forum offers tailored, fully funded support, including advice on leadership, management, and digital technologies. Attendees can connect with business leaders, advisors, and industry experts. The forum will feature workshops and talks by experienced professionals, including Richard Askham, who will host a workshop aimed at enhancing networking skills. To date, we have over 100 businesses booked to attend this event. The visitor economy clearly remains a key sector across Lincolnshire, and we are fully committed to supporting that sector. I'm delighted that we are hosting a conference on the 11th of February at the Brackenborough Leisure Resort in Louth, entitled Content is King, How to Add Value to Your Offer. We have 165 attendees already booked and a waiting list for this event, which shows the real need for us to actually prepare and host these kind of events. In order to give our businesses the competitive edge, for this event, we have lined up keynote speakers in terms of Lucy Lapwing from BBC Springwatch to talk about nature tourism. Heather Greenwood from Location Links is covering TV and film tourism. And Hayley Toyne will cover the opportunities associated with music festivals and weddings. The conference will fully showcase all the practical support, market insight, and content on visitlincolnshire.com that we have helped to develop with this sector to attract new visitors, inspire return visits, and promote Lincolnshire as a thriving UK destination. On the 25th of February, we'll be hosting the Lincolnshire Energy Conference. This is a flagship event which has national and international speakers, which has already gained national attention. Do share the event with businesses in your area, and hopefully some of you will attend yourselves. This is the opportunity to gain insights from leading experts and decision makers about navigating the transition to net zero and the challenges and opportunities it presents for businesses across our county. With a focus on affordability, investment and innovation, the event will explore how businesses can adapt and thrive while contributing to a resilient and sustainable energy future. Lincolnshire has a vital role to play in shaping the future of energy in our country. This conference is a unique opportunity for business leaders to come together, explore innovative solutions, and drive the conversation about the transition to net zero, whilst ensuring economic growth and resilience for our communities is centre stage. Our high-profile speakers include the President of National Grid UK Electricity Distribution, who will share her expertise on transforming the electricity network to meet future demands. And probably she'll have some challenges to answer as well. Sir John Peace, Chair of Midlands Engine, who will provide insights into the region's key role in shaping the UK's energy future. Dr. John Constable, Director of the Renewable Energy Foundation, recognised for his critical analysis of energy policy and his advocacy for evidence-based approaches. Additional speakers include from Step Fusion, Siemens Energy, international energy giant HAECO Energy and JEPCO. On Thursday, the 6th of March 25, we'll be hosting Go Digital 24, Smart Growth Conference in the Engine Shed at the University of Lincoln. This flagship conference is a fantastic opportunity for businesses to explore new ways to overcome challenges, boost productivity, and embrace digital innovation. Throughout the day, delegates hear from leading industry experts, join practical workshops, and take part in discussions that focus on how digital adoption can transform their businesses and result in both time and cost savings. Whether a business is new to digital tools or looking to advance their digital journey, this is a chance for them to gain valuable insight and make meaningful connections. The bookings have just opened and we've already got over 80 businesses registered to date. And finally, Chairman, I am pleased to update that the new Business Lincolnshire AI Adoption Accelerator Programme, which started on the 21st of January, with the first of 6 workshops, which will help businesses to harness the powers of AI to improve the productivity within their operations. A diverse range of 20 businesses of different sizes and sectors have joined the programme and are thinking about using the tools talked about to improve productivity around things like sales management, staff training, invoice matching, and website content generation, while also being made aware of the risks and policies needed to use AI safely. This programme will complete in March with a demo day for the delegates to showcase to each other what actions they have taken and their learning points. As you can see, Chairman, we are very busy in the economy part of the council with these events, which I think will help our businesses and across Lincolnshire move further and move forward in terms of enhancing their businesses to succeed in what is a very challenging world right now. So I'll stop there, Chairman, take any thoughts and questions from the committee.
Colin, thank you very much indeed, and it is good to hear. I mean, your remarks really tie in with the agenda that we have, just how much work we try and do at Lincolnshire County Council, practical steps to help facilitate business success. And as you said, Colin, it is a very challenging environment. Do we have any questions for Councillor Davey? We do. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thank you, Councillor Davey, for your update. Great to hear all this work which is taking place in your area. You clearly demonstrate how much this council is on the side of local business here in Lincolnshire. Particularly interested to hear about the energy conference and the future of energy when you refer to the experts in that meeting and businesses. I'm sure this will be an opportunity for you and others to press the point about the our directions of travel regarding solar, that we do welcome that on rooftops and not on our best food growing farmland, because as you know, unfortunately another application was approved last week, which as you know is another dagger in the heart of those local communities that are campaigning against this. and it's also that perfect storm which we suffered in Lincolnshire under this government. So I do welcome that opportunity for those in that room to campaign to preserve Lincolnshire for growing food, for food security. Also, you refer to the visitor economy. I do believe that's an area we do need to press on and continue to support, and not just the coast, but also many towns. And it's an area that we do need to expand to visit Lincolnshire. So many people have not ever visited this county, and when they visit, they need to be made welcome for return visits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Did you want to come back on any of that, Colin?
I agree with Councillor Taylor clearly that tourism is critically important to Lincolnshire. It's one of our big sectors. It's worth over £2 billion a year. So obviously we need to support particularly those in the hospitality and leisure sector who are struggling right now with some of the changes brought in through the budget, about whether they can even physically survive going forward. So we need to help and support where we can in that sector, and telling people and signposting people to our great county and our great attractions that we have here is critically important. That's what Visit Lincolnshire does, and we'll continue to make sure we enhance Visit Lincolnshire to do more in that area. In relation to the energy conference, yes, it's going. I mean, for me, it's a flagship event where we're going to have a really robust discussion about the transition to net zero and how it needs to be done in a way that is affordable and sustainable for businesses. And ultimately, we need to look at the impacts of some of the decision making in this process. You're absolutely right. Solar on BMV land is a ridiculous idea. We don't support it, as you know. We shouldn't support it ever. There are plenty of opportunities for brownfield, industrial land, rooftops, and as many other people do, down the middle of motorways, on bus shelters, and all those kind of things. So we're taking the lazy way out, really, of planting it on farmland. What we should be doing is asking that sector to be much more innovative and actually use the spaces that are available to it, which will not cause harm to our food security of our nation or to our communities. Solar is widely supported by most people. I support it because we've been putting it on our buildings for a long, long time now, and we should continue to do so. But we shouldn't do it at the harm to communities and to our farming sector.
Thank you very much, Colin. Yes, I just add, Councillor Taylor, I'm, as colleagues know, dual-hatted. I'm also a member of North Kesteven, and at North Kesteven, we recently passed a motion and wrote to the government suggesting that there should be a sequential principle in solar, that where there are available large agricultural buildings or large industrial buildings, great areas of roof space, often with really good connections to the grid, they should sequentially be favoured for solar installation ahead of what Colin was referring to, best and most valuable agricultural land. That motion was supported across the House. It was actually proposed by one of our dual-hatted county colleagues, Councillor Lindsay Corey, and supported by me. So we have written to the government. That is a simple, easy to implement, practical step. It isn't the complete answer, but it's a useful one. We have not yet had a reply. I will keep the committee posted on that, because that kind of practical step is important. Councillor Mrs Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Colin. Very informative. I'm pretty sure, Colin, I know that you are not happy about pylons, and I think my successor, because it won't be me, will be certainly, whoever he or she is, will certainly be picking up this issue. It's not only pylons on the beautiful old areas like the Wolds, but it is the impact on agriculture. A pylon in the middle of a field, I'm afraid, anyone who's farmed, and you will know, my husband will tell you, that that's a big area of uncultivatable land. You can't just sort of go and plant a few things underneath it. So can this, can your campaign against pylons please well, spread over all of our land, whether beautiful or functional, useful as regarding, good quality growing land. Thank you.
Colin, would you like to pick up on that one?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Very happy to. Obviously, you're all aware of where we stand on the pylons issue. We're very clear. I'm very clear about this. We wouldn't design an energy policy that we're currently having to deal with at a national level in the way it's currently being proposed. We've got 20, 30 years of inactivity at a national government level of all parties, of all colours, who failed to actually look at what was strategically needed for the long term in terms of energy policy. As a result, we now have this ridiculous proposal for pylons down the whole of the East Coast, plus cable routes crossing over most of our best and most versatile land, which destroys the quality of the soil for generations. So we've got some real challenges in this area, and government does appear to have made Lincolnshire the dumping ground for all of this, without any regard to how the nation's going to be fed in the future. There will be more to say on this, I'm sure, at the next meeting, when I'll have further thoughts on how we combat the pylons issue.
Thank you very much, Colin. I'm looking around the room to see if any other member has a question or a comment for Councillor Davey. Seeing none, I will move on. Thank you very much indeed, Colin. Do stay with us and join us again later. Do we have any announcements from senior officers present? I'm seeing a shaking of the heads at the moment, so we will move on to item 5, which is the Revenue and Capital Budget Proposals 2025-26. This is a pre-decision item, and you can find it on pages 17 to 24 of the agenda pack, and the report outlines financial proposals for the environment and economy services, highlighting pressures from inflation, rising operational costs, and legislative change. The focus is on waste management, planning, and economic infrastructure, alongside updates to the 10-year capital programme. The committee is required to review the budget proposals and provide feedback to inform the executive's decision on February the 4th, 2025. And the actions we are invited to take are: 1, to consider the report and determine whether we support the recommendations to the executive as set out in the report, and 2, to agree that any additional comments be passed on to the executive in relation to this item. And the report will be presented by Pam Clipson, Head of Financial, Naomi Clark, Strategic Finance Lead, Place LFR, is also present for the discussion. So is it yourself who's going to start, Naomi? If so, over to you.
Yes, it is, Chair, thank you. Okay, so just a brief background then to the paper. So it's worth noting that a combination of demand pressures, unit price increases and burdens arising from new legislation, including the key announcements in the autumn budget with regards to national insurance and the national living wage, have increased the council's cost base from the previous planned level. These budget proposals in the paper also reflect the estimate level of government funding expected to be available to the council, and a proposal to increase council tax up by 2.99% in 2025-26. So I'll now just highlight some key items on Table A on page 20 with regards to the revenue budget. So first item then, we've got waste. So waste is forecasting 4.7 million additional costs. So the key drivers behind this are increases in gate fees. These have increased, and inflationary increases also. There's further increases expected across haulage and operation contracts associated with waste services. The waste budget includes an energy from waste forecast. The income received is based on wholesale energy prices, which do fluctuate. The 25-26 budget is based on receiving the same level of income as in 25-26 as we did during 24-25. Therefore, there is a risk that we may not receive this level of income. The council holds an in-year contingency as part of this approach to mitigating risk. in recognition of the risk associated with increasing energy from waste income targets, which cannot be guaranteed, a contingency has been created. Other points are there is a new 300 million extended producer responsibility for packaging has been announced, and we are expecting Lincolnshire to receive approximately 7.482 million in 25-26. There will be clear expectations on how this funding is to be used. Moving on then, looking at environment, including flood risk management. So 24-25, there was a ruling group amendment to increase investment in the Green Master Plan delivery, tourism and public rights of way. So 1 million has been removed from growth and environment in 2025-26, and in flooding there was also a ruling group amendment to increase the investment in the flooding team by 0.87 million in 24-25 only. This has been removed in 25-26, and this is why you'll see the result in the negative cost position for environment in the table. Moving on then to capital, so a key item to highlight to yourselves here. On the 3rd of December 24, the Executive approved the creation of an economic investment programme which will enable the Council to build, serve and extend business sites according to local requirements. This programme is proposed to run from spring 25 and is expected it will generate in around 3,000 good quality jobs in the area. The proposed investment is 20 million, which has been added to the Place Capital programme profiled across 25-26 to 29-30. Thank you. That was the main points I'd like to make from the paper.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll open it now to the floor for questions. In fact, I'm going to start with one myself, although I've got 2 or 3 bubbling around. The budget. How will you aim to address the budget shortfalls due to the reduced funding growth, which is outlined in the provisional settlement, and thus the 9.7 million deficit, without excessively relying on reserves, which of course can really only be used once and then they're not reserves anymore?
Sorry, was that question directed at myself, Chair?
Could you just say that again? I didn't quite hear you.
Sorry, Chair, was that question for me?
Yes.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course. It was really about how we address what are in effect shortfalls in the budget. Our central government provision is reduced with the settlement which we had before Christmas. We have a deficit which we're running. We don't wish to rely excessively on reserves. So how do we best cope with not having as much money as we would like to have?
Okay, so
I see another officer waving at me from the other side of the room, so would you care to come in, Justin?
Yeah, Chairman, and apologies, I'm sitting on this side, I popped in late. I guess there are 2 or 3 things. The first is that across all of the services that we have, we are finding that inflationary pressures and demand on our services and so on make the budgets really, really tight, and there's no way I can say anything else than that. But what we do in terms of monitoring is that we have monthly sessions with our colleagues in finance and all of our budget managers keeping on top of things to try and avoid any in-year surprises, any in-year difficulties. We're all of us also looking at how we can innovate and identify any efficiencies to enable us to provide services of the same quality, the same volume, but at less overhead. So there are a couple of things that we are doing, but at the moment it's fair to say it is significantly challenging to be working within a budget envelope which is really, really tight. So it's it's something that we'll continue to work on, but I suspect the challenges are not going to go away in the short term.
No, and while I have you, if I can throw, excuse me, a supplementary at you, one of the features about the way the settlement has been constructed this year seems to be a shift in resources disposed of by central government away from primarily rural areas like our own and more toward metropolitan areas. Now, that's not for a second to say that metropolitan areas don't have their challenges, don't have their difficulties, don't have their requirements, because of course they do. However, so do rural areas, and I do worry that we aren't being completely misunderstood. Again, it's easy to ask, well, how are we going to mitigate for that? It's much harder to actually deliver on the ground. My fear is that that might be a long-term trend, or at least a medium-term trend. What implications does that have for us in terms of the services that we're able to deliver to our people and how we go about delivering them?
So I'll comment in terms of the economic services, and I know my colleague Chris has been looking at similar issues in terms of waste services, so he may want to come in as well. But the first thing to say is that there appears to be a narrative at the moment which is saying the money is being moved to areas of higher deprivation. And I would challenge that we don't have high deprivation in a place like Lincolnshire, and we also have significant additional cost in terms of delivering in a rural area. So there's certainly something for us to do about continuing to challenge that. Every consultation on local government finance, etc., needs representation, and the county council network, of course, helps us to get those messages across at national level. We are looking, as we have to, at different types of service delivery. It's very easy to think of digital platforms as service delivery, but we do have digital poverty in the county, and it's very difficult to deliver services in a universal way if some people can't feel confident in how they use digital services. So there's a challenge for us around that as well. But the other thing I suppose to say is that we do pivot quite a lot. So Samantha, for example, will talk to you in other committees about training and learning and skills. And we are seeing some of the government funding changing in that respect. So it's a lot more about employment than vocational training, perhaps. And we've pivoted some of the teams to be able to deliver those services instead of the ones which were declining due to a lack of government funding. So there's a lot of pieces in the jigsaw, but that's only really the growth services side of the jigsaw. And I don't know, I think Chris Yorston's been doing a bit of work, Chairman, that might fit in terms of waste as well.
In that case, Chris, let's hear from you before we move on.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Justin. Also, just to note in the paper, we've received EPR funding for the next financial year as well, so it's important to detail that we've got that. We've got £4.82 million for Lincolnshire, and that's the polluter pays principle for processing the packaging and recyclable waste. So that's going to be our first payment. We've got the estimate come through, which the team are reviewing. And then there's a lot more information coming through now on what's going to be happening in future years. The likelihood, though, is that funding will reduce as packaging waste moves away from the residual stream and becomes more recyclable, so you become a more efficient and effective service. So there is that additional funding for us to utilise. Also, for waste, we do have a significant pressure for next year with increased tonnages, inflation and operational issues, as detailed by Naomi, but also the year after, with the food waste plan and what we've talked about in scrutiny previously, there's a significant opportunity for us to save on cost savings. So I think we've got a year of pressure in waste, but then after that we've got a definite opportunity to reduce our revenue spend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move to the Vice Chairman now.
Thank you very much. Firstly, just to pick up on a couple of points officers raised. I appreciate that metropolitan areas have lots of deprivation, but by the government's own metrics on the indices of deprivation, unfortunately, we score quite highly in many of them in quite a lot of areas. So I think we need to keep the pressure up and highlight to government who may be unaware of the challenges of rural communities, as has often been cited in any council chamber, I'm sure. That obviously we need the money and it's a real challenge to deliver the services that our residents deserve. Also, to pick up on a point Chris raised, do you think that obviously we've got in, hopefully getting a £7.482 million, I'll call it a bonus for lack of a better word, because it won't last for long. Obviously, manufacturers and producers will reduce the waste. I know in this chamber many times we've talked about how we're collecting more and more waste and there's very little as a county we can do about it. Do we envisage a reasonable impact on reduction of waste that we need to dispose of? And then the actual point I was going to raise was at 2.7 it talks about an increased investment in the flooding team of 0.878 million. What plans exist to ensure continuity of flood management initiatives post-funding removal in 25-26?
So I'll pick up on the couple of waste items there then. So yeah, so it's a new thing, so it's something we're going to be monitoring as we go forward. But yeah, the whole purpose of EPR is to move waste that is not recyclable into the recycling stream, and also to generate less waste. So the plan is, in the government initiative over the next few years, is that we reduce the amount of waste going in the residual stream, which we send to our energy from waste, and more goes into the recycling stream. But also packaging gets smaller, so we're having to recycle less, because even recycling still uses energy and produces carbon dioxide. And so I think you're sort of seeing the impacts of that already. I don't know if when you're in the supermarket, I've noticed when I've been in there, certain products that were in plastic tubs are now moving into cardboard packaging. I've noticed on some crisp packet and multi-packs, they're now moving towards paper packaging, and I think that's that's a significant impact of the EPR legislation kicking in. Thank you.
Chris Miller, did you want to come in and pick up on the other point?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, just on the question on the flooding and the 878,000. So that was awarded as a one-off. It was to pay for an increase in the staff cohort within the year. That's now built into the base budget, so it's not like we've lost that and we retain those staff. The remainder of the money was to cover the significant and unprecedented amount of Section 19 investigations we had to do following storms Babette and Hank. We retain an element of base budget for that as well, so hopefully the weather gods will be kind to us and we won't have to spend more than that. If we do, then we'll have to look for extra finance to be able to cover that. In terms of the ongoing pipeline, we were also awarded capital money last year, and that's being helped. That's going to help deliver a number of flood alleviation schemes going forward. We're developing that pipeline based on the knowledge of the Section 19s done under Babette and Hank as well.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Couple of comments first. I mean, under the circumstances, this is a very good budget. It looks after the things that people are really aware of, the flood and water risk management and local flood defence schemes. It's only fair that even though we're under financial hardship ourselves, that we look after the people. Going to pick up on another couple of things, so I've got questions on them. Firstly, the countryside rights of way. I am aware there are some legislation charges in there, but there appears to be nothing spent on them. Our walkers are very passionate about these areas and expect them to be in good condition. So I'd look for a bit of an explanation around that. And the final thing I would query, Boston development schemes. There's some money in for 24-25. Does that mean that those schemes will be finished for the next year? And that's it, Chairman. Thank you.
Chris, would you like to start on that one, please?
Certainly, yeah, I can pick up on the public rights of way issue. It's built into the environment budget as being one of the services that I cover. So we don't see a reduction in the amount. In fact, there's a slight increase based on the medium-term financial plan to cover increased contractual costs in the next year. So we remain as business as usual.
And I'm looking to see whether an officer volunteers to handle the Boston question.
Someone will come
Justin.
back. Someone will come back in a couple of days. My PC's just crashed, so I'm struggling to see the Boston question at the moment. But certainly, Councillor Skinner, I'll make sure someone comes back to you within the next 48 hours.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I think I had somebody else. Was it Councillor Cook? It was Councillor Cook. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have a few questions, and I think, we all sit here today know the challenges of local government finance and its difficulties. Obviously, they're not just affecting us, but also the wider local government piece across the country. However, I will say on a personal level, it is disappointing that we are here and looking at high-level strategic overview of revenue and capital budgets, and we don't have our Director of Finance or Section 151 officer here to provide us with that assurance in answering some of the questions on the holistic state at a high level of the County Council finances. And I'm just stating that as my own personal thoughts today, because I do think if you look at the report that we have in front of us, I think you raised the question in terms of how does the Council plan to address the anticipated shortfall of £9.7 million in the budget year of 25-26 without compromising critical services. What decisions are going to be taken? I note earlier a comment was made about efficiencies are going to be looked at. We've been in a state of flux with local government funding for the last goodness knows how many years, and I'd hope that the easy quick wins of efficiencies have already been taken. So actually for us as an authority, it will be determining in the future what services we are going to continue operating, what we prioritise, and when what we are going to stop. And I think that's the debate that ultimately will come down to us as politicians in terms of what we wish to see continue. But I do think that's the conversation that we do need. And obviously, without our Section 151 here, we're not going to get that clarity today. So I'm happy to ask my questions, and then I hope that they are answered in verbatim in terms of email. I also have questions in terms of what steps are being taken to mitigate the impact of reduced national funding allocations on local services, and how are we prioritising those which services we wish to fund. I think if you read the report, we are having increasing reliance on reserves, and that is not uncommon in local government, and that's not specific to us as an authority, that's generalisation. But what measures are we putting in place to ensure long-term financial sustainability for us as an organisation? Because obviously we can't keep dipping into the reserves on a continued basis year after year, as you have already mentioned. And I think also, and I think, forgive me, I can't remember your name, our head of waste, I think it was, in terms of increased operational costs, such as for those of waste management, how are we going to continue absorbing those into the budget framework? Because we know it's not just waste management, it's all other services that we provide. We know what inflation is still continuing to do to costs in terms of running this organisation. And I think these are some of the areas that I don't have anything wrong with the report, and I think it's a very well written report. But I think actually if we'd had a bit of a more holistic discussion in terms of the strategic finance of this organisation, that would have been beneficial today.
Well, firstly, I'm sure we can capture those comments and pass them on to the relevant quarters, but I do agree with your overarching concern, and that was very much what I had at the back of my mind when I referred to this shifting of resources from areas like our own to particularly metropolitan areas, but basically more urban areas. And as the Vice Chairman has pointed out, we do have issues, but we also have services we want to deliver. And we are very good at delivering those services. And it does seem to me that sometimes it is councils which are efficient and which do perform well, which in a funny sort of way are actually penalised, versus those that haven't performed well at all, and then they get special support, whereas we have done, across a very wide-ranging board, a very good job. But you're absolutely right, there is a strategic issue here. It doesn't impact on us immediately, it's not a next year's problem, but it is a foreseeable problem as to just what we do, and just how we try and keep the services going that we have historically provided, but may not be statutory obligations. We were hearing earlier on from the portfolio holder and from our officers about the good work that we do in terms of facilitating economic development. And indeed, we've got the Federation of Small Businesses with us this morning for a later agenda item. That kind of economic development work is enormously important in generating positive, active, real returns in terms of prosperity for our residents. If we don't have the funds, we can't do the work. It's not a statutory obligation in the way that some are. I just picked that as one example. there are other examples. So I agree with your worry. We will pass on those concerns. I don't know, before I move on, whether there are any other officers, any senior officer who would like to pick up at a strategic level Councillor Cook's comments, or whether we'll leave that to another meeting of the Section 151 officer, but it is a point well made. I'm looking round the room to see if any further member has a question or a comment that they wish to make, and I am seeing none. In that case, we will move on. Thank you for your questions and comments. We'll conclude the discussion on that item. We have the proposal before us simply that I move the committee supports the proposed budget to the executive as detailed throughout the report, and ask that our comments, as these have been captured by the scrutiny officer, be shared with the executive ahead of its consideration timeline. Do I have a seconder for that? Vice Chairman. All those in favour, please show. I think that is unanimous, but are there any abstentions? Any against? That matter is carried. That matter is carried. Thank you very much indeed for an interesting debate. I'm sure it's one which we will come back to in this committee and elsewhere. We now move to item 6, and we're running a little behind time, which is the contract for the collection and treatment of street cleaning residues. This again is a pre-decision report. You can find it on pages 25 to 34 of the agenda pack. This report addresses the expiration of the current street cleansing contract on the 31st of March 2025. It proposes a new contract which changes in payment mechanisms, with changes in payment mechanisms and terms to align with market practices and ensure environmental compliance. And the committee is invited to assess the procurement approach and provide recommendations before implementation. The Executive Councillor for Waste and Trading Standards is due to consider the report for a decision between the 31st of January and the 18th of February 2025. So our deliberations will be fed into that. And our actions are, 1, to consider the report and determine whether we support the recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Waste and Trading Standards as set out in the report. And secondly, to agree that any additional comments be passed on to the Executive Councillor in relation to the item. And the report will be presented by Leanne Fotherby, Commercial and Procurement Manager, and Rachel Stamp, Waste Partnership and Project Manager. I don't know who's going to start, but over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chairman. So as you say, the contract relates to the collection and treatment of street cleansing residues. As the disposal authority, Lincolnshire County Council have a statutory duty under the Environmental Protection Act 1990 to dispose of waste materials deposited by the waste collection authorities at its waste transfer stations. The current contract for street cleansing residues expires on the 31st of March 2025 with no further options to extend. The current supplier is Invixen Limited and the contract is performing well to date. The purpose of this contract is to provide haulage and treatment of street cleansing residues collected by the collection authorities, which are deposited at the 5 waste transfer stations across Lincolnshire and, in the case of West Lindsey District Council, directly at their depot. The waste is stored within the bunkers at the waste transfer stations and at the West Lindsey depot until it's full, when its collection is requested. The requirement is therefore very volume driven and subject to seasonal fluctuations in the volume of waste collected, and the collections during the summer months are ad hoc, with the majority of the collections being in the autumn and later in the year, although the volume of materials increased over the last few years due to the increase in major storms, as we've spoken about already this morning. There'll be no minimum volumes guaranteed within this contract. Pre-market engagement was undertaken with only 2 suppliers responding, the incumbent and an SME with a facility in Derbyshire. Pre-market engagement has identified that the market prefers a shorter term of 3 years for the initial contract length, with an option to extend by a further 24 months, so for 2 separate 12-month periods, and very little mobilisation time is needed. We're intending to use an open competitive tender route, as there are limited suppliers in the market who specialise in the haulage and treatment of street cleansing residues at the reuse level of the waste hierarchy. The payment mechanism will be a cost per mile for haulage, along with a cost per tonne for the treatment element, and this will include indexation on the fuel element of the mileage price, which will be indexed on a quarterly basis. This will ensure that mileage costs are reflective of fuel prices, reducing the likelihood of suppliers building in additional risk to their pricing. Pricing for the treatment will be on a gate fee basis, and it is unlikely that, given the volume of material presented, we'll receive an income from the outputs of the treatment, but we will request that income is factored into the gate fee price. The quality element of the tender process will focus on how bidders will ensure service delivery targets are met, along with operational management of staff and vehicles and routing and business continuity arrangements. Performance will be managed through the contract with service credits applied if performance falls below the targeted levels. They will include adherence to collection plans and routes of travel should be the safest and quickest routes between the waste transfer stations and the supplier's facility, and therefore it's important these are adhered to optimise the number of collections. Based on the advice from health and safety, the supplier should propose routes of travel. The supplier will have the knowledge, skills and systems to identify the most appropriate routes. This passes the liability from the council to the supplier if there is a safety incident, e.g. highways or bridges used where load weight can't be held. And this is an addition to the specification that we've put in now as respect of haulage, Chairman.
Before I open it up to the floor, as it's a little bee in my bonnet, that last comment you made in addition in other words, we would, as a baseline, expect, wherever possible, that the material would be transferred on main roads and would not be running through highways, byways, and particularly rural villages.
Thank you, Chairman. That's exactly what we mean. It's primarily by use of A roads and only by exception and prior arrangement that they would take detours.
That was precisely what I wanted to hear. Thank you very much indeed for that. Opening it now to the floor. Councillor Cook, start us off.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. So I've just got a few questions. So how will the move from price per journey to price per mile impact overall costs and contractor accountability?
So the move from price per journey to price per mile is in line with all of our other haulage contracts. It has reduced the price of the haulage because it's not, the suppliers haven't loaded in price. We only pay for journeys for loaded miles as well. So once those lorries are full, we start to pay from that point on to the end destination as well.
And then in terms of, obviously, as a county, you know, we've got a lot of local suppliers. So how will we make sure that they're not excluded from the bidding process?
So the open tender process allows for everybody who has the correct capacity and capability to be able to bid for this contract. We've specifically looked at our documentation to make sure that it is open and accessible for small, medium enterprises to bid. We did a pre-market engagement exercise to highlight the fact that this opportunity was coming up as well, but there are very, very limited suppliers within the market. They do tend to be small, medium enterprises that operate within the local area.
And then obviously, actually this week's a prevalent example. So adverse weather effects. So obviously I think we all know that we're getting worse weather, whether that's climate change or not. So we're not going to have that debate today. But obviously there is now increasing frequency and volume of street cleansing post all these sort of weather events. So I suppose, how does this new contract help to address that?
So from that respect, there is no guaranteed tonnage, no minimum, no maximum tonnage. There is an expectation that as the waste collection authorities go out and clean streets, we have the flexibility within this without specifying volumes to have an off-taker who's been made well aware that actually there's increasing seasonal variation in terms of the specification. We're aware of that. Fingers crossed, and I think as Councillor Griggs said, it would be nice if the weather gods shined on us at some point, but we have the flexibility built within the specification that says we don't guarantee minimum or maximum, and that we're going with the trends.
And just final question, thank you, Chairman, for indulging me. Sort of looking at safeguards, so what have we put in place to ensure compliance with sort of environmental standards and minimising waste going to landfill?
So again, going back, just checking which one of us was going to answer, apologies. And so in terms of those safeguards, we do a lot of work around waste minimisation, and that is increasing, and it takes us back to the last item on the agenda. There's a lot of public engagement that we are now doing to get people to be more responsible for what they are throwing and how they're disposing of it, and we will continue to do that work because it's vital. And also, you know, we're working within the permits of the Environment Agency, and in terms of that safeguarding, we're very much and making sure that we're compliant with that, and we're regulated by the EA in terms of what we can and can't do and collect.
And also, sorry, as part of the procurement process, although it is an open procedure, so we don't have a selection part, businesses do have to fill in the assessment criteria. Part of that is, do you have the right licenses to be able to operate within this area, and we do due diligence to make sure that they have as well.
Councillor Skinner.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Although waste is supposedly not affected by the Environmental Protection Act, you would expect all the operators to abide by the risks that are there. So that was just a comment on what you said. Fascinating this is. It doesn't say whether we dispose of private waste on this. I mean, out in my ward, our Lincolnshire tractors deposit quite a lot of dirt on roads and paths. The fact that it contaminates as well, you do get some discussions with farmers when the water has passed off the roads because it's contaminated actually onto the land, because they have the supermarkets lay down some very specific conditions for growing. But apart from not knowing how much is collected by district, because we've got quite a large total there, and what is private and what is it just ours, or is it just from the waste sites? So I'll be looking to hear from that. Thank you very much, Chair.
Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Skinner, this is the street sweepings that the district councils, the waste collection authorities go out with their street cleansing. Some have got their own vehicles, some will subcontract. So it's they're taking along the streets wherever they are required to for their scheduled cleansing, for any ad hoc, if there's any difficulties, you know, if there's been any incidents that they go and clear. We certainly don't collect, as a county council, we don't dispose of anything that's brought into us from anybody outside of the waste collection authorities.
Thank you very much for that, but I'd still be interested in what the figures are to see how proficient each district is at collecting. Thank you.
I'm sure we can provide those at a subsequent meeting. I'm just looking to see if the Vice Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was just looking for Councillor Cook's camera. He seems to have read all the questions I'd written down on my paper, near enough verbatim. So the only one he didn't cover, so I must have turned the page too quickly for him, is on page 30. It talks about contamination and work being undertaken with district authorities. Could we have any detail on what work could be undertaken and actions to mitigate the contamination and thus reduced in processing costs? Thanks.
Thank you. To be fair, we've had one instance where we've had contamination within the last contract life, and we've worked directly with the district council to understand what had caused that one-off instance. And what we have is a level of tolerance in terms of the types of materials that the supplier can dispose of, and they have a percentage contamination in there. We are talking about things potentially like excess household waste that's been put into the curbside in black bags that potentially, once broken, will get sucked into a street sweeping vehicle. We're then able to work directly with the WCA that it's come from when we see it on the floor, and we'll go and engage in that area with our district council partners. As you're aware, through the other waste initiatives, we have a performance and improvement team whose role is they've very much supported the twin stream rollout, but their role is very much now around improving the quality of waste across all waste streams, including street cleansing with us. And as with everything else that we're doing, this is about making sure that the public understand their own responsibilities and are accountable for what they do with that. So very much around the ongoing education and engagement, and we will continue to do that across all waste streams.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm looking around the room. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. I would just observe, thank you, Leanne and Rachel, for the report, but also thanks to the entire team behind you for the service provided. It's a really interesting one, this, because it seems so simple. And indeed, I think for most residents, it is pretty simple. Somebody collects the rubbish from your house, somebody cleans the streets, and somehow magically all that stuff disappears. And then we can drop another crisp packet and it starts all over again. I think what we've heard this morning, both in terms of the report and the debate, is actually doing what seems like a very simple task is actually very complicated, subject to lots of different regulatory regimes, and is logistically very challenging and also quite expensive. And one of the things this report demonstrates is, we were talking earlier on about savings, we are always alive to new ways of doing things, different ways of doing things, including those facilitated by changes in technology. The savings that are available today aren't necessarily the ones that are available tomorrow, and tomorrow there will be ones available that aren't available today. So we have to be dynamic in this. But it's been a lovely example of how what seems ostensibly to be a very simple thing, well, they collect the rubbish on the streets and they clean the street, we dispose of it, is actually something quite complicated and quite challenging. So well done to the team for doing that. So I think we've exhausted that one in terms of questions. The proposal before us is as follows. I move that the committee supports the recommendation to the Executive Councillor for Highways, Transport and IT as detailed on page 27 of the report, and I ask that our comments, as these have been captured by the Scrutiny Officer, be shared with the Executive Councillor ahead of its consideration timeline. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Skinner, thank you very much. All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous, but we'll just check. Any abstentions? None. Any against? None. That is agreed. That is agreed. Colleagues, it is now 11 o'clock. We are running slightly behind time, but we have some fairly chunky items to come. So, as is suggested in my notes, we will take a 10-minute break and we will resume at, well, it's now 11:02, we'll resume at 11:12. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. We resume the meeting at 12 minutes past 11. The next item on the agenda is item 7, Federation of Small Businesses, report on the future of the High Street. This scrutiny report can be found on pages 35 to 126 of your agenda pack. The report examines the challenges facing UK high streets, such as declining footfall and rising operational cost, and proposes solutions. And the actions before us this morning are: members are invited to consider and comment on the contents of the report, review its findings, endorse ongoing activities, and discuss future recommendations to strengthen high streets. And the report will be introduced by Samantha Harrison, Head of Economic Development, and further presented by Katrina Price, who we welcome this morning, who is the Development Manager for the Lincolnshire Federation of Small Businesses. And we'll take questions after the report briefing. So, Samantha and Katrina, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So I would like to update members. Lincolnshire County Council is committed to working with the Federation for Small Businesses and its members. This partnership approach has been increased following the signing of the FSB Local Leadership Charter in 2023. The Charter outlined how the County Council can work with the FSB to support and empower small businesses, the self-employed, and help them to continue to develop and grow and create interesting and exciting job prospects. I'm pleased to say we meet quarterly with the Federation, and we work as a group. We meet with the councillors, Councillor Carrington and Councillor Davey, and we look at how our operations can actually work to support the FSB and its members. This is done through the work of the Growth Hub. It's working with our procurement team and how we can extend our procurement practices to make sure that small businesses are able to procure into county council contracts. We also promote our town centres and our tourism offers, and it's all about embracing connectivity, digital technology, and how we can ensure ongoing highways access during highways works. I would therefore like to introduce the Future of the High Street report, and this has been produced by the FSB, and it looks at the challenges and suggests recommendations to local authorities, including the county council and district councils. The overall aim is to increase the vibrancy of the high street, and this chimes particularly well with the work that this committee has undertaken in the past. When we think of the Town Centre Scrutiny Committee, the scrutiny panel that you commissioned last year, and the findings that we are now delivering in terms of town centres, but also the work that we're doing in terms of business support and really about working as a partnership to drive this forward. I'd like to hand over to Katrina Pearce, the Development Manager for Lincolnshire, to outline how we can support the Federation for Small Businesses to deliver some of the recommendations. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Samantha, and thank you, Mr Chairman, for inviting me to receive the report with you today. For the uninitiated, the Federation of Small Businesses for the past 5 decades has been speaking up for and standing up for the UK's small and medium-sized enterprises and the self-employed community, which now numbers almost 11 million separate enterprises across the UK, employing 16 million people. I have the great privilege of standing up for those businesses here in Lincolnshire. So to give context on our report today, the British High Street continues to evolve and has done since the days of market stalls and mongers of the Middle Ages. Then as now, they're not just places for transactions to take place, they are part of the cultural fabric of the UK and play a vital part in building and serving our local communities. Despite rumours of its death, the High Street and all that it means is alive, but changing and significantly challenged. Waving, not drowning, would perhaps be a good analogy. Quickly shifting consumer habits, technological advancements, environmental threats, as discussed this morning, increased remote working, fewer local commercial landlords, transport issues, and of course the deep scars of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, have all rapidly forced independent business owners to adapt in order to remain open and providing local flavour to the high street and employment opportunities for local people. That adaptation is becoming increasingly more expensive and challenging, and the bricks and mortar businesses that currently make up and populate the centres of Lincolnshire's villages, towns and the city of Lincoln need support to survive and thrive, especially from this April when changes brought about by the autumn budget will kick in, particularly increases in the national insurance contributions that local employers will have to make, and a reduction in the small business retail discount for hospitality, leisure and retail businesses. Some of those adaptations the businesses can and do make themselves, but there are many interventions to the business ecosystem that central and local government can make to strengthen and improve prospects for retail and hospitality businesses and strengthen the local and cultural offering at the same time. That ecosystem needs to be one that encourages people to spend time on our high streets so they also spend money. While that fact also applies to national retailers, we are especially keen that local independent high street businesses are supported, as for every £1 spent in a small local business, 63 pence of that remains unspent locally. In a county with over 40,000 SMEs, this is a critical economic factor. But research shows that empty units, ageing public realm, safety, security, antisocial behaviour, lighting, refuse collection, parking, bus routes, lack of diversity, out-of-town estates and the constant allure of online are all at play to deter visitors from high streets. That needs to change and a new generation of the high street allowed to thrive. FSB's far-reaching report, The Future of the High Street, which has been submitted for your consideration, was researched at a critical time post-COVID in July 2023 among 1,500 SMEs across the UK via a survey and online series of focus groups and in-depth in-person interviews. The views and needs of those businesses were analysed for almost a full calendar year to analyse and assess the significant views and needs and set a series of ambitious recommendations for change published in August 2024. The recommendations to local authorities, planners, government departments, bids, banks and regulators all set out in the report span 5 critical themes: destination, transformation, experience, infrastructure and competitiveness. Driving new cultural and tourism offers, bringing vacant units back to life, reviewing the accessibility, cleanliness and appeal of each high street, meeting new demands for parking and options and supporting digital shifts are all opportunities to be met by Lincolnshire County Council and the districts. I realise many of you here are operating with 2 hats representing your county council seats and also the districts, so you'll no doubt be thinking of specific high streets in your own areas as we discuss the report today. I'm happy to provide some specific examples or case studies if that's required, either today or in subsequent meetings. But thank you for considering our report, and I look forward to working with you all to achieve positive, sustainable change for Lincolnshire's high streets into the 21st century. Thank you.
Katrina, thank you very much. Could you turn your microphone off until questions come, and then I'm afraid it's turn it on and turn it off again. I'll come to the floor in a minute. First, I just wanted to thank you for being here this morning. As you said, I'm privileged that along with Councillor David, the portfolio holder, I do meet regularly, usually on Teams rather than physically, to discuss this incredibly important area. And I think as we go forward and considering your report, we have to remember that our county is particularly skewed towards small businesses. Small and medium enterprises and indeed micro businesses are absolutely at the heart of our economy. And maybe I can start the questions by kicking off with some national background at the moment. I think we would, all of us in this room, I hope, support the government's narrative about aspiring to growth. I think where differences may occur, it's in the means of implementation. And when we look at things like the increase in national insurance, which we've had recently, but also things like taxation policy on family businesses, which are key to the small business environment, we're seeing challenges imposed. What we're trying to do here, of course, is assist business. In the last sort of 6 months, 1 year, putting it in the context of post-COVID, where things have been very tough anyway, and then the price hike with the Ukraine war, in general terms, how is small business coping in Lincolnshire, and how do we mitigate against the most recent, particularly I'm thinking of NI, the most recent challenges imposed?
Thank you. So over the last year, I mean, I would say the business sentiment has remained the same for around the last 5 years. And I think we can all imagine what happened almost 5 years ago since the impact of COVID. Business sentiment has been low and unstable. We've had minor fluctuations when the lockdowns were released. Business sentiment and optimism started to surge back up. And then with each subsequent hit of either further lockdowns, the war in Ukraine that suddenly and with increased volatility affected energy price. We're now, businesses are operating, as you said, in an incredibly expensive environment where operating costs, before they've even earned a penny, whether that's paying their staff, paying their rates, paying for stock, paying their rent, and all of those other operating costs are becoming increasingly more challenging, not just by the month, but by the week. So business sentiment is not at all where we would like it to be. Every quarter, the FSB conducts a small business index. It's essentially an assessment of the current sentiment amongst business, how optimistic are they feeling about the economy and their own opportunities to prosper in that environment. For the last 5 years, and particularly in the last year, that has been in minus territory. So we're not talking at kind of like plus 50 points or 100 points. We are in minus territory every single time, particularly here in the East Midlands, where in previous years we have rather booked national trends in terms of optimism. At the moment, we are still in that negative territory with the rest of the UK. Now, while that is quite a concerning tale, and we do have to take into account what we mentioned about what's happening from April, those operating costs are going to rise yet again for those bricks and mortar businesses, particularly in those with staff. And again, in a county of 40,000 small enterprises in Lincolnshire, of all of the enterprises here, all but 120 are SMEs. So just over 40,000 are in the territory that we're talking about that need that support. So while sentiment is low, their ambition is high. They want to survive this. They want to keep carrying on. If they didn't, many would have closed the doors on the 23rd of March 2020 and never reopened. So I think that's testament to their tenacity and their will and their desire to keep serving their communities. But this is amongst very, very challenging to their morale. But in terms of the opportunity, the challenge is there are many opportunities to not necessarily underpin or forget about what's happening nationally. What we can do here in Lincolnshire, hopefully with some of these interventions and more targeted business support, is offset those a little bit, or at least educate and inform the businesses about how they can diversify, how they can offset some of those costs, how they can retrain, how they can match their their bricks and mortar offer with an online presence as well, and that's all set out in the report.
Thank you very much. We'll move to some other questions now. Councillor Griggs.
Thank you very much for giving me a moment. I've lost where my page was on. I think it's a brilliant report. There's lots of stuff I agree with it. I think a lot of the issue comes down to funding. So I think some of the actions are fantastic, and it'd be great to see us doing more, and boroughs and districts. I think one of the issues that's mentioned is small firms relying on footfall, and obviously we know that even people, I'm going to class myself as young still because it makes me feel slightly better, people as young as myself and those older go into town to nip to the bank, go to the post office, and we're frequently seeing, as the report indicates, that there's a massive reduction in banks opening hours, post offices closing. In Boston, for instance, WH Smith's just closed, so that makes it somewhat awkward for people going into town to do jobs and then going, oh, I'll pot around the shops while I'm here. So it becomes ever increasingly harder for small businesses. It's quite related in that it talks about cleanliness of the high street, and at the moment I'm dealing with an issue with weeds on John Ann's Way, and from my point of view it's quite frustrating the amount of time it takes for us to action additional cleaning that wasn't programmed in originally for grot spot areas, and I envisage it's the same for districts as well. So I think we as a county need to do more work to be more responsive to specific needs in certain areas, and try and facilitate districts where possible. So yeah, thank you very much for your report. I agree completely with it, but how do you envisage us tackling issues such as lack of funding, and what can we all do other than go out and spend more, obviously, to support small businesses?
Thank you. So obviously I've heard everything that's already been mentioned this morning about the economic challenges that the council itself faces. So while we would all like to be seeking a lot more new money from central government to fund a lot of this, I suppose what it's really about is redeploying and refocusing existing funding pots. When the new round of UK Shared Prosperity Fund kicks in, it's still rather unclear what's happening there and whether it would be to the same scale and the same guidance. It's about redeploying current pots where possible while we're busily in the background seeking further support from government when we know the stakes are high. The stakes are high when 99.3% of all businesses in the UK economy are SMEs. If they don't thrive, none of us do. So being realistic, this is about redeploying existing pots of money and finally focusing them with the help of the Growth Hub and some of your district colleagues as well to making sure that the funding that is available is well advertised, the take-up is high, and we play a role in that as well, in advising and signposting our businesses, and that we are making the best bang for our buck, I guess, essentially. So we would love millions and millions and millions of pounds of new funding to come in. We are realistic that it's really about redeploying and finally targeting existing funding pots. And sorry, what was the second part of your question? What can we all do to support more businesses? Now, again, I mean, you articulated it there. It's really about supporting small businesses where you can. If you have the choice between shopping with a national retailer or seeking a service from a national provider, that you look locally, again, because that benefits us all. 63 pence of that pound that you spend with a local business will benefit the high street because it's all repaid then in rents, in rates, in local wages, that again is then spent in those businesses. So it's quite a perfect storm when it works well. Yes, supporting the businesses, not just in terms of spending more money. There's lots you can do without spending a penny to support a small business. If you're on social media, sharing campaigns or offers or new business openings with your followers to raise awareness of fantastic things that small businesses are doing, where there are cultural events taking place across the districts, that making sure that small businesses are given collateral to celebrate and be part of those campaigns, whether they stay like in Boston, for example, when the Christmas light switch on was on, businesses were encouraged to stay open later, to provide coffees, provide late night shopping, making sure that small businesses are part and parcel of those events and not a kind of byproduct of them. So yes, please spend more with them, but where that's not possible, there are lots of other things you can do by sharing details of what they do, what they provide with your network, and making sure they are part and parcel of any cultural event going forward.
Thank you very much for that. Turn now to Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, firstly, can I thank and congratulate Katrina and her team for the work that she does across Lincolnshire and also Stamford. I know we've known each other for a long time, and I follow actively your activities on LinkedIn in supporting our business community. And I think for us, our role in local government is to support business, but actually encourage it in terms of cutting regulation, in terms of encouraging them to grow and allowing them to really succeed and employ more people. Obviously, you've picked up on in the report in terms of how high street businesses are changing to online competition and the changing retail market. I suppose, what further do you think we can do as an authority in supporting those businesses?
I think one critical thing that's at play here is one of skills and helping business owners and their staff to do more with what they do. So to be able to offer training programs for them and events like Councillor Davey discussed this morning to help those businesses to understand changing opportunities open to them, providing whether that's skills boot camps that help them to diversify, to change the way they market, to become a hybrid business that's both online and a bricks and mortar enterprise. So I think the skills matter here is critical, and I think that's where the council is very well placed to help those businesses to diversify and to be strong in skills to run their businesses, keep them resilient and keep them responsive to local need. I think that's the biggest element there.
And just a further comment, so obviously looking at more sort of, I suppose, tangible infrastructure investments, what would, and this is your own perhaps personal opinion, what would make them more attractive to businesses in terms of making them more accessible and attractive? How should we go about to get more people onto our high streets?
The single biggest factor, and this is personal opinion and it's backed up by the business input into the report, it's parking. Now, this is something you may have to take back to your district colleagues as well. Lincolnshire is a big rural place. We all rely on either public transport or our own cars, primarily the latter. where parking is expensive, it immediately puts people off. And again, it kills that dwell time that I spoke about. If we can get people to spend time, they will stay and spend their money. When people are constantly thinking about, if I stay another hour, that's another £4 parking. No, let's go home now. So there are interventions. Whether, you know, I do realise that parking is significant income, particularly for the districts, but where there are opportunities to maybe have several hours free parking for some of those events that we spoke about, like Christmas light switch-ons or parades, or one Saturday per month, or Small Business Saturday, where there are opportunities to piggyback onto existing campaigns or events to encourage people to come and spend time in the town where they haven't got the constant lingering worry of how much they're spending on parking. That encourages people to spend more time, and they will there spend more money in those businesses. So it always makes people roll their eyes slightly when I start talking about parking, because it doesn't seem particularly strategic, but it is true, and that's what kills dwell time, and it kills people spending money, is parking.
Just to add on that, you know, obviously for me, you know, I'm not on South Kesteven, but obviously they've just increased car park charges across the board, and you know, Stamford, which is obviously my division now and has been, you know, is basically a cash cow for the rest of the district in terms of charging. And obviously, you know, we have we don't have that much capacity because, of course, Stamford is a tourist town effectively, and people want to come in, and it's got a fantastic retail offer. But actually, by increasing charges, you know, you go back to that supply and demand curve where, as you're saying, you know, you want people to spend longer in that town, and obviously, actually, the impacts that probably we'll see is it detrimental harm to the high street by just hiking up prices.
Absolutely, that absolutely, when you're looking at the visitor economy, we want people to be not spending hours, we want them to be spending potentially whole days. They're parked up in the town and seeing all that they can. A secondary issue with in-town charge parking is that it just drags people to the out-of-town estates where it's 2-3 hours free parking. Significantly, it's national retailers, national offers that are on those out-of-town estates. So when we've got expensive in-town parking, it's driving people further away out of the town where it's free parking, and they're spending their pounds with national retailers.
Yes, I would absolutely support that. I think parking is a very big issue. It is an enormous source of revenue for cash-strapped councils, but there is an issue here of killing the goose that lays the golden egg. And in fact, the next, I'm dual-hatted, one of those that you were referring to earlier with a district responsibility, and at North Kesteven, the next executive board will have a proposal, which I strongly suspect it will support, that we freeze parking charges and do not increase them. And we do, you know, Christmas shopping days, we do free days as well. There are other parking providers within North Kesteven who do not do that, including some town councils, and I think that's unfortunate. I think we really, if we want a vibrant high street, we have, I believe, to cut our coat according to the cloth, and we really have to bear in mind the impact that parking charges and the perception of parking charges has, and it's an important part of your report. Moving on now to Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Much appreciated. Thank you, Katrina, for that presentation. Great to read this report, and the title says it all. It's the future, isn't it? We now need to look in that direction. That's the direction we are travelling in. People can often refer to the past, but we don't gain by referring to the past. We need to look at where we're going. And as you also referred to, we did bounce back, build back after COVID. So there is clearly a future. Town centres are alive, but there are challenges. Particularly, you mentioned on the 1.5 customer experience. I believe that is vital, because I know when we go somewhere, we return if it's a good experience. If it's a bad experience, we do not. And you spread the word, whether it's in this county or elsewhere. So you refer to skills, and it's not to be a negative about those businesses, but they shouldn't be afraid to ask about developing particularly customer service skills, because they have got that opportunity to attract new customers and returning customers, and also that knowledge of the products. Unfortunately, last night I was forced to go to the supermarket. It was a miserable experience. A self-serve checkout and all that. We need to look at what small businesses offer. So maybe if these large shops keep pushing people towards self-service checkouts and the poor experience, it may force them or encourage them to look at the small business offer, but they do need to be open for business. And I've mentioned this before and I've been criticised, but also flexible opening hours. I do know some shops who close mid-afternoon. Well, people finish work at 5 p.m, after 5 p.m, or 6 p.m, and particularly in the summer, it's light to 9 at night. So there's an opportunity there. Not every day, but maybe a Tuesday or Saturday, occasionally, or Sunday, to be open a bit later, to work with colleagues and work in partnership. But there's an opportunity there, and also maybe many towns offer free parking on Sundays, or the shops are closed. So there's a way of, I think, changing the approach a bit to be more flexible. And of course, Councillor Grigg spoke about cleanliness. That's so important, isn't it? That clear connection between cleaner streets and safer streets, cleanliness and safety. Because if you go to a town and it feels unsafe or unclean, you're unlikely to return. But if it's clean, pleasant, attractive, vibrant, you do return and spread the word. So it's quite basic, but it seems sometimes a struggle to actually deliver that. And there's a couple of questions. One, that last debate regarding car parking. Some of us are Twin Hatters, but this is, as you know, not the District Council. So have you directly contacted District Councils with the argument? That's one comment. And also regarding the establishment of a permanent high street manager, again, Councillor Griggs referred to funding. I didn't see where that proposal suggested for the funding comes from, if that could be dealt with. So just a couple of comments there, and then a few questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So your first comments around, if you've had a bad experience, you won't go back, but you'll tell many people. I think what you actually really well articulated there is the experience element of the high street. If it's unclean, you don't feel safe, it doesn't feel open for business, why would you return? And that's why it's about that ecosystem working together. If there's free parking on Sunday, but the businesses need to be open, so where the ecosystem needs to be working together well, rather than these things being operated in isolation. With regards to have we contacted the District Council? Yes, every single council in the UK has had this report, including I've made sure all the ones in Lincolnshire have had this. Whether we've had much of a response out of them is quite a different approach, but again, we will keep going back and keep trying. On the town centre manager, now, I mean, some of these will be very ambitious recommendations. They won't all be locally relevant. It is a UK-wide report. And again, there isn't reference to how that would be directly funded. I think that gives, in one way, a bit of flexibility to allow local authorities to find the best way that they think that would be funded, whether that's an SPF-funded role, whether that's from whether it's funded by districts. So there's some flexibility in there, but you're right, there isn't a direct solution as to how that would be funded. It would be the solution is there, but not where that would be funded is set out. You're absolutely right.
Councillor Taylor, briefly, if you would. I don't want to curtail the debate, but I'm conscious of the fact that I have 5 councillors still waiting to
sorry,
to
just
speak.
briefly, I appreciate that response. And regarding promotion plans, that's also referred to in the report. And also we know events attract people, such as you mentioned, Christmas lights switch on, in Spalding, the Flare Festival's return, the Pumpkin Festival are very popular local events. I travelled here by train this morning at Spalding Railway Station, very clean, tidy, group of volunteers that help to maintain it. Not a lot there to promote events. So do you work with local transport companies, train and bus, to try and promote events? Because there seems to be a gap there. Thank you.
As a body, no, we don't directly. I mean, we tend to kind of approach them in the kind of, again, in that ecosystem, but we don't have direct relationships where we're bringing them in. And I think that's right. I think that's maybe something that we could do when we're looking at this holistic environment. That's something that we could and should do more. And hopefully we would do that in partnerships with the local authorities as well. But yes, I think you're right. That's something we could do more and better.
Thank you for those answers. Thank you for that question. We move now to Councillor Skinner.
Thank you very much, Chair. I very much welcome this report, and some of the things that have been said really well. Things that don't change actually die. Doesn't matter what the size of the business is. If you don't react to the changes in the marketplace and the changes out there, you ain't going to survive. So there's some of that going on. But what can we do as local authorities? Local authorities don't have to put money in. They can be supportive in the way planning commissions come to them, by helping and directing. They can do all sorts of things. You don't necessarily have to have money. And you have made a point about one event a year, but in my travels throughout the UK, the places that have got nice, small businesses and full high streets are actually the places that run their own events for nothing. And you've got locals that get involved and make it happen. It mentions the bid, and bids, for your information, Councillor Taylor, are actually funded by the businesses. Now, as the businesses shrink, that puts even more pressure. And to have somebody on silly money, as it were, compared to what those businesses... We have some very hard-working small businesses that would love the amount of money some of these town centre managers get. And what they have has been attacked by the last budget, and obviously we have suffered in Boston an increase in parking charges as a way to balance things off as well. So very much welcome this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to come back on that, so I think what you said about businesses that don't adapt do die, that's absolutely critical, and that's the same for national retail as well. I think just this week, WH Smiths are a fine example of that. Toys R Us are a known victim of that, not adapting, not getting on board with the digital agenda early enough, and now as a result we've got these massive footprint units that they've all vacated. Now, unfortunately, no, they're not in my territory, but it is part of that ecosystem. Again, when you've got big vacant units from businesses that have failed to adapt, that does impact on those smaller businesses, and it affects the look and the feel of the high street as well. But yes, thank you very much for your welcoming comments. And yes, you're right, it doesn't just have to be about money. I would love you to put more money in, just for the record. But where that's not possible, it is about that supportive, where there's events, there's training, there's connection opportunities, and there's celebrations as well, that we celebrate that Lincolnshire is a place of SMEs, some that have gone on to do fantastically innovative things, and will do so more in the future.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, if I may, very quickly.
Very briefly, if you
Very quickly. We can all do a little bit by promoting the business. Any new business that happens to be in Boston Coastal, I do all the things you say. I advertise them on Facebook, so we can all do that. That doesn't cost anything, just a little bit of time. And finally, I know you're a scholar of town planning. If we look back, the answers are in the past as well on the changes that have occurred to our high street over the time. Thank you.
I think it's a point very well made about social media, and that goes not just for our town centres, which is subject of this report, but also for smaller communities and villages, because so many towns, so many villages have vibrant groups. They're sort of open to local residents. They might have several hundred or indeed several thousand members, and they are fantastic places, A, for individual businesses to get their message across, but also where we can talk about events, where we can just reinforce that whole thing about the usefulness of the local high street. Linda Wharton, you have waited very, very patiently. Linda, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report. I found it really interesting because I worked in retail management, but it's so much deeper than what we actually read here, isn't it? I mean, due to the UK Prosperity Fund, I'm a Grantham councillor, we spent, I think it's about £2 million on sets in an area of the road which isn't even in the town centre, and that is no way going to resurrect our town centre. And the problem in our town is we've got big units that are owned by landlords and they sit empty and they're not released, I mean even for pop-up shops. Also, we have supermarkets. We've got sort of Morrison's, Asda. I'm sure there's another one that escapes me at the moment. And people are lazy. They don't even come into those supermarkets now to shop, and they just shop online. So that takes away the footfall from the high street. Fortunately, we've still got banks, but you know, there's no incentive for people to go into town and shop. It's great. I mean, I like to pop out for a coffee and meet friends. There's plenty of options there, so that's good. But there's not the retail there. I mean, sadly, I'm a Marks and Spencer's girl. I have to go to Nottingham or to Peterborough to get clothing. There's no local independence in Grantham that you can speak of. Unlike my colleague, Councillor Cook, who's from Stamford, and I love to go to Stamford because I love to go into the independent shops, and that's just not on offer there. But I've got a couple of other questions. My colleague behind me has brought up about bids, and my question to you, Katrina, is Does Lincoln, is it part of a bid? And do small businesses have to pay the levy to belong to that bid to get the incentives from it?
Happy to answer that. So Lincoln does have a bid. It's just been, in the last month or two, voted in for a third term, actually. So Lincoln has a well-established bid. They run lots of the cultural events that take place, that we know, the Monster Festival at Halloween and the Ice Trail, so they take charge of a lot of that and take responsibility for things like security within shops and walkie-talkie systems. So Lincoln does have one. In the last 6 months, Spalding has voted to have its own bid. I was on the founding board for that. That's still very much in formation, but that will have one soon, and we're now looking at forming one in Boston as well. Again, it has to be voted. It has to be a vote. The businesses have to choose whether they have a bid or not. Most businesses do have to pay towards it. It's a levy. It's a percentage of their rateable value, essentially. The very, very smallest units can sometimes be exempt. It can start from around sort of £100 per year. It can go up to several thousands, because again, those big retailers, Boots, WH Smiths, Tesco, if they're within the bid boundary, they have to pay in as well. So that's one area where usually the bigger businesses do bring in a lot of money that benefits the smaller businesses in the bid boundary. So yes, they do have to pay, but some of the very, very smallest units are often exempt.
Right, thank you for that. And Chairman, just if I may, there's only one paragraph on retail crime. I hate shoplifters. I run miles after shoplifters, but back in those days, you could perhaps get away with touching people. Now you can't even apprehend people and sort of ask them politely to come back. So it must be really difficult. What's your opinion on the police not coming out to deal with shoplifters? And I'm not quite sure. I thought there was like a £200 limit at one stage, which I think's absolutely disgusting, because I've run after people for sort of £5, etc., etc. So I'd like your opinion on that, please.
Shoplifting and rural crime as well, they are absolutely pernicious and rising as well, and they cost small businesses billions of pounds per year as a collective. You're absolutely right, there is a kind of threshold as to whether it's worth a business owner or their staff calling the police. Sometimes they'll do it to get an insurance number if they feel it's worth it, but they are often hamstrung to say it's simply not worth it. There's almost an acceptance that it's just comes with the territory now. And how awful is that, to have to see stock that you have bought, you have laid out beautifully, you expect the income from that, to see that be taken out of the door. Business owners don't tend to challenge that now because of their own safety and security to their staff, to their premises. And I think it's an absolutely pernicious and increasing impact on the small business community, not just in terms of pounds, but morale. It is absolutely heartbreaking for businesses to have to watch stock taken away from them, and almost with a kind of, oh, it's happened again. Now that's where interventions like bids or security operations that businesses sometimes, like shop watch and pub watch, sometimes where they will take charge of that themselves, do have to pay for it, but they do have a really positive impact where businesses can alert each other, support each other, and that offsets not just some of the pounds taken, but the morale as well, because it's very, very heartbreaking for businesses to suffer that. But you're right, it's a horrible practice and it is on the increase.
It is. Yeah, thank you, Katrina. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Linda, and we move on now to Councillor Bowles.
Thank you, Chairman. And like everybody else, it's a really good and interesting report. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions, and I will base it around Gainsborough because it's where I'm from and what I know. So I don't know if it is reflective of many high streets around the county. But obviously we've spent through the district council and the Levelling Up Fund and the UK SPF in Gainsborough a lot of money in the marketplace and the town centre. I think if anybody visits there now, you will see a marked difference in the look and feel, but also the number of shops in the town centre. We spent a lot of money on renovating the shop fronts. Now, from my 10 years of being at council, the biggest problem that officers have always told me, and from my experience dealing with the business, and Councillor Wootton touched on it, has been with landlords and should we call them absent landlords for want of a better phrase, in Gainsborough. Now it was remarkable when the money there for the heritage shop front upgrades was available. They've all come to the table. They've all now got nice, new, shiny shop fronts, which is great. It looks good. But my concern is, and it's, I guess my question is about how do you assist small businesses with this? These landlords are loaned to themselves in terms of rent making. You see so many small businesses in Gainsborough start up, seem to be going fine, and then close. And then when you go and talk to the businesses, it's not a problem with footfall, it's not a problem with them making money, it's that they went into the unit on a rent of X amount. After 6 months or a year, the landlord has upped, doubled, trebled the rent. So they just can't sustain it. You know, there's various small businesses in Gainsborough that have been going around a loop. They're probably on the 4th property within the town centre area because they go from one landlord to another every time. They get every 6 months to a year in, and the landlord ups the rent to an unsustainable amount. Again, this isn't relevant to you, but it's the bigger picture. That's not just smaller businesses. You look at Marshall's Yard, and that's exactly the same. You know, we got news last week that Poundland's closing. Go and speak to their regional manager. Again, absolutely nothing to do with footfall. The footfall's there to sustain it. Dransfields have trebled their rent overnight. So that's why those businesses are closing. So my question is, what can you guys and the councils do to bang some of these landlords' heads together and say, surely any rent is better than no rent, and look at the bigger picture instead of us getting businesses in the door, they get the foot on the ground, they get going, and then have the rug pulled from underneath them continuously.
You're absolutely right, and this is a UK-wide problem of absent landlords, those that are owned by offshore entities without a name, without a known name, and I mentioned it in my first comments about absent landlords that are not local. They're not owned by a local family, not owned by a local person. They're owned by some sort of unknown entity offshore, and it's interesting to say that uncontactable until there's some money to be found to help them. I know in Boston this is a particular issue, where we've got 27% of all the units in Boston town centre are vacant at the moment. A vast majority of those are owned by entities that just can't be contacted, and in some cases it can be cheaper for them to own that, to retain that property without a tenant for the tax benefits, than actually get a tenant in and have it vibrant and serving the community and the rent as well. So that is a national problem, but it is something that we're campaigning government to implement and change legislation around absent landlords because of the collective cumulative impact this is having on the UK, the look and feel of the high street, units that could be renovated, that could be thriving once more, but are left vacant and decaying. So if you look at the post office in Boston, that beautiful old building, surrounded by small businesses, right on the edge of the park, is sat visibly decaying by the day, but there's no incentive for that landlord to renovate it. So we're pursuing a change in legislation around that. That's a long game, that one. But you're right, it is absolutely pernicious, and it's just shows the change in the economy in the last 50 years, where it used to be those units would be owned by someone local. That is not the case anymore. But yeah, it's very interesting that they are uncontactable until there's some money to be found.
Before I move to Councillor Fleetwood, can I just ask a supplementary, because I think Councillor Bowles raised a really important point. Parallel to that, do you think that there is any, as it were, incentive for some of these landlords who have empty properties and maintain them, in that successive governments in the past 10 years, particularly the past 5 years, have made it very easy indeed to achieve change of use from retail in town centre to domestic dwellings? Do you think that that has played any role in basically it's worth more money to them to try and convert retail units into residential rather than maintaining retail?
It could be, and the mixed use of the high street isn't necessarily a bad thing if you can get particularly younger single people to come and live in a town or city or village centre. They tend to be ones with most disposable income that want to go and spend money and time in the shops, the bars, the cafes. So mixed use and having residential units on the high streets and change of unit is not necessarily a bad thing. The type of housing is, of course, important, whether it's well maintained, whether it's responsibly maintained, are wholly different issues. But whether there are incentives for landlords to maintain their premises and keep them for retail or leisure uses, then there's no incentive there whatsoever for them to do that.
Thank you very much. And we move now to Councillor Fleetwood.
Oh dear. I've got potentially a few interests in different places. First of all, thank you for the report, very much appreciated. A lot of the points have been raised that I was going to talk to, but I'm a dual-hatted councillor living on the fringes of Lincoln. And last night at Gainsborough we had a debate about banking and bits and pieces, and I declared that I would rather go to Gainsborough than to Lincoln to do my banking. Because essentially, if I want to go and do something like a transaction such as that, I need to park in Lincoln. Well, the first thing I endure is car parking fees, which are interesting. I'm trying to park in a car parking spot that was designed for a car from, let's say, the 50s or the 60s. So most car parking spaces are not sufficiently large enough to put my car in. So I'm concerned about whether I get my vehicles bashed up here and there. Once I've done that, I then go down to the bank. And I was stood on the steps of one of the banks a couple of weeks ago, a little bit before they opened. I looked across the high street, and there's a coffee shop, and there's a vacant shop, and there was nothing much. And I looked at it and I thought, how the face of Lincoln High Street has changed. And it's down to the rental. I used to be a retailer, and I used to have a retail interest in Lincoln. And my claim to fame there, I suppose, was we would get broken into at least 2 nights a week, every week. And so it used to go on. So crime was an issue. And then we talk about people walking in and out of buildings and picking up things that they don't want to pay for. Well, if you look at Mr. Small Retailer, if you have 1 or 2 members of staff and somebody legs it down the street with something, you do not have the ability to chase an individual. If you're the co-op, you might have a security guard that can go down the street after somebody, but if you are Mr. Small Retailer, you can't do that. But then again, if you're Mr. Small Retailer, you're in the Lincoln City area, you are the hands of either Lincoln City Council or the co-op mafia, and I'll leave it as loosely as that, charging whatever rent they should wish, and as a retailer, you're sitting there with what are very, very interesting rates. And if you try and rent a building anywhere near Highbridge or the entrance to the Waterside Shopping Centre, the rents there are phenomenal. And to retrieve that through retail and then put on your staff costs and your additional NIC contributions, it becomes interesting. So then if you are looking for an independent retailer, where do you go to? Well, I suppose you used to be able to get to the top end of the high street, and there was 1 or 2 there, but they're now coffee bars or bars of some description, coffee shops. You can walk round and you could go to the Central Market. Well, if you look at the Central Market at the moment, it opened a few months ago, and the retailers are running there. They're jumping out like rats jumping from a sinking ship, because effectively the footfall isn't there, the rents are high, and the revenue stream doesn't come from it. It's a very, very tough world in retail for Lincoln. So going back to where I started from, full circle, I would go to Gainsborough to do the bulk of my banking or whatever transactions. I would still struggle hard to find retailers, but at least in some of the market towns, we do have the local businesses you talk about, where if you put £1 in the till or you put £1 across the counter for whatever purpose, it stays local. So I always prefer to go and spend, if you like, in Gainsborough, Horncastle, Louth, and look after the local people as best as I can. But what a mad world we live in. And congratulations on the work you're doing, and good luck with how you're trying to keep small business together. But it's a horrible world out there when you are competing with either people who are robbing you or the white van man who is bringing goods in, cutting your margins and making life interesting.
I'll just and on that. But thank you very much. Thank you for all of that, and you articulated it very well. The challenges, and it is a multitude. It's at every turn there is something challenging small business owner. Whether that's morale, it's crime, it's financial, it's rates, it's rents, it's footfall, it's changing environment. There is so much up against them. But isn't it fantastic that we still have 40,000 of them in the county wanting to get up every single day, open their shops, open their doors, employ people, do fantastic things in the environment they've had to endure just in the last 5 years alone. I think it's an incredible testament to them that despite all of that, they still keep doing it, and thank God they do.
And I'm going to move on because we are well over time on this one, but I think it's such an interesting debate. I don't apologise for that at all. Last on my list of speakers, but certainly not least, is Councillor Mrs Austin. Alison.
Thank you, Chairman. I was beginning to... I don't know, the list in front of me seemed to grow. Right, well, of course, most things have now been said. One that hasn't, am I imagining it? I mean, I'm a so-called dual hatter. When I was elected to Boston Borough Council in 2007, wasn't there a Boston bid then? Yes, what's happened to it?
Yeah, your memory serves you quite well. There was a bid there. Now that's before my time, I'm afraid. But from what I've heard from discussions with the businesses that are now starting to kind of come back into the circle of discussing whether a bit something as formal and official as a bid is the way they want to go, or a more of a loose business association that takes responsibility for certain elements of the town. It's still very early in those discussions. You're absolutely right. It did have a bid. The feedback I've understood is that it wasn't particularly successful. This is their phrase, wasn't well run, and therefore when it was due to be re-voted in again, it didn't go through. So you're absolutely right, there was a bid, but that was the case in Spalding. Didn't have a bid. It got very, very close to achieving one before, utterly fell down and left a very bad taste in the mouth of a lot of business owners. Yeah. But enough time and enough vision from those businesses has made them think again, and I think they do want to come together to take ownership of parts of the town that aren't necessarily the direct responsibility of a council or a private landlord. There are things the businesses are quite willing to take responsibility for themselves, as the people of Lincoln, the businesses of Lincoln and Spalding have seen, and now in Boston they want to do the same. So whether it's just enough time has passed that any sour taste has dissipated, but yes, you're right, there was a bid some years ago.
Right, now, Chairman, I know you're going to hurry me up, but on the other hand, you didn't hurry everyone else up, did you? So you're going to have to pay the consequence.
I'm emphatically not hurrying you up. This is a really important debate. We want to hear
well,
everybody's
you haven't got to tolerate me for that long. Where do we start? Well, actually, I'll start with a positive. There are local groups of people who have got small shops. They are some of our, what were incoming, but I think now are as native resident as most other people. That is people who initially, families came in from Eastern Europe. We have a lot of small food shops serving those people, and I think that's all credit to them. I don't know, well, I do know who other nationalities own the shops, and I'm not sure that everything is perhaps, but the people working in the shops, they are selling mainly local foods for themselves. That's an opportunity that was being missed, wasn't it? Otherwise, there are fresh fruits, fresh vegetables that are not perhaps what our natives are used to. But I think that's excellent that these people are seizing an opportunity. Now, going on from other things, though, right, I think you referred to the marketplace. People would like to park in the marketplace. I think if they could, they'd like to drive in the back. But I always say, if we're not careful, Boston has the most prestigious car park in the country, probably, because we've got these beautiful listed buildings. You know, we've had shop front schemes, etc., but they are owned, I always say, rather tongue in the cheek, by someone sitting at the top of an ivory tower in London, probably with a pension fund, and they look at the size of the shop, they look at, oh, centre of Boston, yes, that's quite a sizable town, but they forget that we are a low-wage economy, so it's just unreasonable. Now, where do we go on from there? Well, we've talked about car parking. People have taken things into their own hands, haven't they? So that we now have online shopping. And what actually bugs me is the queue at the post office or wherever takes parcels of people returning things. More, you know, almost more goes back than it came out, I sometimes think. So the high street is, in fact, being killed by, when I say ourselves, you know, the people who are not shop owners. I do the minimum of online shopping, but I have to, you know, since a well-known brand closed, as Councillor Orton said, and yes, I could go to, well, don't ask me where, probably Warrington, I think, to get things, or I do go to Stamford for other things, but that's at independent shops. So those are all the problems that we are now facing, aren't they? We haven't talked about, we've talked about car parking, public transport. Well, I only live 1.75 miles from the marketplace, but by the time I've driven to get a bus, I've only got a short distance. Well, you see, there may be rural transport, but it's the transport in that, almost in that fringe part of the town. Did I hear someone say they came here by train? How in the world do you do that from Boston? Well, you catch a train that goes from Skegness to Sleaford, and then you hang around for goodness knows how long, and then you get on another train, if you're lucky, to go from Sleaford to Boston. I'm sorry, wrong way. I think you've given up and gone back home, probably. But you know what I mean, from Sleaford to Lincoln. So there's all these nails in the coffin of retail. Farm shops, yeah. I use one of our local farm shops. I do have to drive to it, but, you know, I don't mind about that because that's where I like to shop and I get what I can there. So, again, there is still that possibility, isn't there? But how much can you get in the town centre itself? You know, I hope the bid can resurrect and do something, but what, please, do we do with the marketplace in Boston?
Thank you for all of that. I think you've articulated a lot of it well. I mean, marketplaces are, and markets in general, I mean, I cover the full county, so of all the markets in Lincolnshire, I'm usually involved in a conversation somewhere about them. They are sometimes some of the biggest bones of contention around. There's a belief that markets don't exist anymore, no one shops at them. If that was the case, there would be not a single market left in the UK, let alone in Lincolnshire. So people do. What it is a chance for is to help new enterprises start up on a market. So Marks and Spencer's that you spoke about started as a market stall in Leeds. It is now one of the biggest retailers in the UK. So I think there is the opportunity to look at that example, and it's articulated there about particularly young entrepreneurs. If they're just thinking about starting out, to start, whether it's things they make, whether it's services they provide, before they take out a shop unit, or to force them to be an online-only enterprise, there is vast opportunity, I think, across the districts and the council to encourage young entrepreneurs to start a marketplace and to follow that path that lots of other retailers do. But I think there is a brand issue with markets, particularly in Lincolnshire. If you talk to people, there isn't a market in Boston anymore, or there isn't one in Sleaford. Well, there is otherwise, but if people are shopping at them. But all of that stuff that you've mentioned, whether it's parking, whether it's bus routes, whether it's, it's raining, so I'd rather go to an out-of-town estate where I can dash straight in and out. All of that stuff, you're absolutely right, is up against them, and it does take significant effort. And again, it's that business ecosystem that needs looking at as a whole, and markets are as valid as any bricks and mortar business on the high street.
Mm-hmm. Chairman, may I ask one?
Alison, I really do have to.
Will be my final one.
Alison, I believe the chair is speaking.
Hmm?
I believe I was speaking, Alison.
I apologise.
Thank you. If you would have one very brief final comment.
We had a large store become vacant, Marks and Spencer's. Suggestions were invited. I would have loved to have seen that as, if you like, not quite an indoor market, but an indoor facility for like start-up shops or small craft shops. Is that sort of thing a possibility? But I suppose it depends upon who owns it.
I mean, you've almost answered the question for yourself that yes, it's absolutely pop-up shops and those kind of like teenage markets and things. They are well trialled across the UK. Spalding does a particularly successful teenage market. I think Horncastle does as well, where they either take parts of the physical marketplace or vacant units and have maybe once a month pop-up days where someone comes and trials whether they want to run a business completely. So yes, there is a model for that, but it is highly dependent on who owns that business and how collaborative they are with the local business ecosystem, I imagine. But you've almost answered that for yourself.
Right, thank you very much indeed for that answer. I'm very conscious of the fact that we have another item to go and we have other colleagues waiting. I have let this one run on for half an hour over its allotted time. With no apologies, although I see that some of my officers are having three kinds of eggs, because it is such an important area. We might schedule slightly more time next time, and I'm going to propose that there is time. But if I can move to the formal proposal now, because I think everybody has had ample opportunity to ask questions and to speak, it is this. I move that the committee endorse the report and that our satisfaction be recorded on the detail of measures employed to support businesses in Lincolnshire. And I would add to that that the committee would very much welcome a further report in the next civic year, 25-26, to keep monitoring the evolving picture on our high streets, which is going to affect all Lincolnshire divisions. And whoever may be in the scrutiny function, there will be a scrutiny function in the next civic year, and I think it's very important we're kept in touch with this most important area of business. There are a couple of other points which I will raise privately with you, particularly about the role of district councils, because it seems to me that that is an important one, and I'll talk to you off-grid about that. So, I propose that. Does anybody dissent from that? Seeing none, that matter is agreed, and again, I thank you very much indeed for coming along, Katrina, and Samantha as well, for bringing this very important matter before us. Moving, not very swiftly, but finally on to the last substantive matter on the agenda. It is item 8, English Devolution White Paper, Transition of Local Enterprise Partnerships and Implications of the White Paper on Strategies for the Future. This next report is on pages 127 to 138 of the agenda pack, and the report explores the implications of the English Devolution White Paper for Lincolnshire, including the transition of the local enterprise partnerships into combined authorities and new opportunities for economic strategy and spatial planning, reviewing the white paper's content, noting its impact on local governance, and providing input on the closure of the Greater Lincolnshire LEP. And the actions before the committee are, firstly, consideration and commenting on the content of the government's English Devolution White Paper, and secondly, noting the programme which is being implemented to close the Greater Lincolnshire Local Enterprise Partnership. And the report will be presented by Justin Brown, Assistant Director of Growth. Justin, over to you.
Chairman, thank you, and I'm very aware that we'll keep this very brief, and therefore essentially there are 4 points I would highlight from the report. The first one is that the Devolution White Paper talks about spatial development strategies. You as a committee have done a lot of work on looking at the different infrastructure barriers to growth, the infrastructure challenges of growth, and it is our intention to use that work in determining how the County Council will respond to the spatial development strategy. Now, whilst the spatial development strategy is expected to be delivered by the mayoral combined county authority, we as a constituent authority will need a strong voice in that. So my intention is that we focus our contributions on those items that you've discussed over the past 4 years about infrastructure and growth, notably energy, flood and water, transport. Second item in there is that the government is also asking for combined county authorities to produce local growth plans. Now, as a team, we're a little confused by this. On the one hand, you've got a big spatial strategy. On the other, you've got a big economic plan. The government is asking for local growth plans to focus on the three biggest priorities the area wishes to see the government promote for growth. It's all fine and dandy if you're in an economy that's really only got one or two facets, but as you know, a large place, a lot of different industries, small and large businesses, etc., it provides us with a challenge. Our intention, though, is to follow the strategic priorities that you set around food, defence, advanced manufacturing, and that the County Council has followed through in terms of the economic investment programme that Naomi proposed earlier. Third item is that the government is going to create a small business strategy. And I think given the conversations that we've had at previous committees around the proliferation of small business advice schemes, the conversation you've just had about absent landlords, that really, as local authorities, we cannot take much of a role in, but central government potentially could through HMRC. I would suggest that we, through my scheme of delegation in consultation with the portfolio holder, will put an early doors response into government saying these are the things that we would like to see. So in terms of the sort of strategic bit of the white paper, I would suggest those are the three steps. I would ask the committee, though, just to take a look at paragraph 1.8 of the report, which is on page 129. We are now closing down the local enterprise partnership and all of its responsibilities at a strategy level transferred to the combined county authority. All its responsibilities at an operational level, so things like contracts, things like achievement of outcomes, transfer to the county council. So we get the sort of the slightly scary and difficult bit of the equation, but what I've set out in paragraph 1.8 are the 5 principles that I intend to implement in closing down the LEP, recognising that contribution of the 200 plus businesses who've been involved in the various boards, not just forgetting them. Making sure that where we do continue activity, despite the fact we're transferring organisations and all of that sort of thing, we focus on no change to the customer, seamless journey for the customer, which I think fits with some of the things Katrina said. That the body of evidence that the LEP has created is made available to everyone so they can continue to use it, whether that's in supporting bids for funding, setting strategies, etc. And then, really importantly, that we protect LCC so that all financial contracts are managed legally and effectively so that the transition is smooth. And then lastly, a long-term programme which is about making sure that we capture the outcomes that those investments have made. So despite starting this by saying I'll be brief, I've taken longer than I expected to. But really the white paper there recognises 4 areas where I think we can continue the work this committee has done, and I would particularly welcome the committee's endorsement of those principles in paragraph 1.8. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much. It just underlines, doesn't it, how easy it is to have aspirations, including good aspirations, but when it comes to the detail of implementation, whether it is devolution, whether it's local government reform, the devil is in the detail, and the detail is incredibly important. And just your comment, excuse me, on, as it were, the divisions of responsibilities and duties with the closure of the LEP, I almost said you couldn't make it up, but actually someone did. And I do share a concern with you that is almost a microcosm for other bigger change where government perfectly legitimately has an aspiration, but the detail has not been thought through and the consequences have not been thought through. And just those subject headers on the LEP alone remind us of just what complexity there is. And as we look beyond the institution of the Combined Mayoral Authority to a larger scale LGR, this whole business, which I hope is exercising not just this council, but all councils, how do we port through all the good things, whatever they may be, that we are already doing for our residents into the new system? I do fear that there are people in Whitehall who are sitting there looking at it from the point of view of systems and organisation. We, being local, we look at it from the point of view of people, the people we serve, because they aren't hundreds of miles away. They are us. They are our neighbours. They're people who live on the same street as us. So it is enormously complex. You certainly have my personal support for this, but I'm looking around the room to see if any members wish to add to the debate. I'm seeing none, Vice Chairman. We're seeing none. One has to go, but we understand that. In that case, thank you very much indeed for the paper. We have not devoted as much time to it as we might have done, but I think you can say safely that it is supported very much across the chamber. So we have a proposal which I'm going to move. I move that the report be endorsed and that the committee's satisfaction be recorded in relation to the assurances provided about the effectiveness and efficiency of actions taken under the process of closing the LEP operations. And on this point, please let the record reflect that the committee notes the work programme presented. Does anyone dissent from that? I am seeing none. In that case, that matter is agreed. So we now move to the final item on the agenda, which is the Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. This item is on pages 139 to 144 of the agenda pack. The item enables the committee to comment on the content of the work programme, and the report will be presented by Chiara Haziano, our scrutiny officer. And our actions are to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. Chiara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to take any more of the precious time. Just to confirm that for the time being, we've got no further amendments to the work programme as it has been published with this agenda pack. I have taken a note of items that have been suggested as potential topics for the next council term, which would be following the last meeting of this committee this March. And if there's anything else to be added, either as a potential topic or as an area of concern or as a known pre-decision item, please do contact me whenever you're available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiara. In that case, formally, I move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 139 to 144. And obviously, if any members have any amendments, as Chiara has asked, do please get in touch. Does anyone dissent from that? Seeing no dissent, that matter is agreed. And slightly later than planned at 12:25, that concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you everyone who has listened in on the live stream or on the recording. And the meeting is now closed at 12:25. Thank you very much indeed.